So I am pleased to be joined by David Leavitt, who is running for House of Representatives in District 25, Seat B, against the incumbent Representative Greg Lanting. So, David, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you doing today, Brian?
Not too bad. Just getting these interviews knocked out. I get to talk politics with everybody all day long, so that's actually kind of fun for me. It might be torture for some people, but I enjoy it. It's a great opportunity. So, well, I guess let's start at the beginning. Tell me about yourself. What's your background? How did you arrive at this point where you're standing for public office? And what are you bringing to the table?
All right. Well, my name is David Leavitt, and I'm running for state representative for District 25, Seat B. I'm a decorated combat veteran with 12 years of military service, including 3 combat tours. I was an infantry soldier in Iraq in 2003 with the 101st Airborne Division, where I was part of that initial invasion. And then after that, I transitioned into civil military operations, where I did 2 deployments in Afghanistan. As far as what I did in civil affairs, I was doing the nation building stuff. So it's like I was working directly with provincial governors, district chiefs, non-governmental organizations, government agencies, and I was out there building schools, roads, infrastructure, clinics, working with agriculture departments, dealing with animal husbandry. So it's like I had a wide variety of skill sets that I learned from my multiple deployments. And it's like with my service, I'm wanting to bring a lot of that to the table to go and serve the citizens of Idaho.
It's
So
interesting.
it's just a little bit of my background.
Yeah, I remember hearing Priscilla Giddings tell her story. She was serving overseas, building democracy in foreign countries, and then looked back and saw that it was being eroded, and personal freedom and liberty was being eroded back home. And so, that inspired her. Do you kind of feel the same thing, or what's your perspective, having been in very different cultures and styles of government, and then looking back at what we have here?
Well, it's like I grew really frustrated with what I was seeing when I did come back stateside because I saw a lot of similarities between Afghanistan and the United States. And it's very unfortunate because a lot of the government officials, like the provincial governors and district chiefs, they were never elected officials. They were all appointed. And working directly with them and the taxpayer money, I saw that they were placing their own priorities and their own interests over that of the citizens that are meant to represent. And the interesting thing about a lot of these politicians in Afghanistan is that they had fled during the late 70s with the Russian invasion and what was going on with Mujahideen. And then all of a sudden we come in and we're bringing democracy and they come back. And so they're completely disconnected from a lot of the citizens. There was a couple of government officials I worked with that were actually the Afghan citizen themselves. But, it's for the most part, a lot of these people had worked for NGOs and other government organizations and understood the ins and outs of how the nonprofit world works. And for me, it was kind of frustrating at times.
So,
So,
uh, now, I know you have some prior experience in the political sphere before running for office. What can you tell us about that?
well, in 2023, I volunteered to come to the Idaho State Capitol and work for Senator Zeiderveld. So I kind of dove in headfirst in that spectrum and was exposed to a lot of things that were happening at the Capitol. And, I saw a lot of frustration there as well, because it's like saw how politicians were working and how the system was worked. And I didn't like the direction of it, especially it's like since I felt like I wasn't being represented. I testified in front of committees where it's like, yeah, Senator Harkin that was sitting there in the committee, and she would say that, well, all my constituents want this issue to go through. And it's like I look at her and wonder, what about me? I'm here testifying against it. Am I not a constituent?
Hmm. Yeah, I can see how that would develop some frustration. I think, maybe a charitable interpretation is that people who have been there a while and are connected to the lobbyists and the big corporations and special interests, they start to think that that's representing the voice of their constituents. If you have a lot of farmers in your district, then you go talk to the Dairymen's Association or the Farm Bureau, and that represents their voices. Uh, if you have an issue like with the library bills, all the testimony from, or most of the testimony, I should say, from library board members and librarians was against the bill, but there were a lot of people who obviously supported it. So, when you win, how would you go about making sure that you don't lose touch with your regular constituents, with the people who are voters in your district? Because the moment you walk in that door, even beforehand, you're going to be wined and dined and feted, and talked to by really loud and powerful interests who have one opinion. How do you go to your make sure that you stay grounded?
Well, a lot of that is like I've been taking a different approach as far as campaigning. And it's like I've been going directly to business owners and talking to business owners about their concerns. And I've been telling them it's like, we have this stakeholder capitalism, which is typically dealt through the associations. I'm like, I don't want to deal with the associations. I want to deal with you directly because I'm not representing them. I'm representing you.
Mhm.
And so if there's a question I have, I'm not a subject matter expert on everything. I'm going to bring these questions to you and I'm going to ask you about them. I want to know how these things are going to impact your businesses and your industries. So it's like I really want the engagement with the industries, with the businesses, especially the small businesses, because they've just been crushed and decimated by a lot of these large corporations that I think have really facilitated in their demise and then been able to bankrupt them and then liquidate them into their organizations.
What do you think is causing this divide in the conservative movement when it comes to business? Yeah, I was just talking in one of the previous interviews today
Excuse me.
how you go to the primary polls at gemstatechronicle.com and you can
Mhm.
see all the races. You can see, side by side comparisons. And one of the things you can see is who's endorsing whom. And it seems like there's one group who's endorsed by Idaho Freedom Pack, Stop Idaho Rhino Citizens Alliance, and then another group who's endorsed by IACI and the farm bureaus and all them. And is there's very little overlap. I'm not sure there is any overlap, maybe one or two between those. So how did conservative and liberty principles get end up on the opposite side from big business? Because it used to be that Republicans and conservatives supported business because we support the free markets and free enterprise, and now it seems like there's this divide there. How do you explain that? And what can we do about it?
Well, that's a really tough question to answer, but as far as the divide goes, I think a lot of it is because of people have not been able to go and communicate with one another. You have certain people that want to go and push industries and institutions in a certain direction, well, forgetting about the people that got them there in the first place. And as far as bridging that gap, I think there's this misconception that a lot of people within the liberty movement do not want to work with the industries and do not want to work with these institutions. And I beg to differ. I think, the future, I'm looking beyond just like what's in front of me and at, the short term accomplishments, but I want to look long term. And, it's like with the way the country's going and with the deficit and everything, we need to start looking to the future and preparing ourselves for it and becoming more resilient. And I think that me as a candidate, that's something that I want to work with a lot of the industries on. I want to see them succeed. I don't want to see another 2008 where all this in this bubble first and all these industries are just bankrupt. And I really want to work for the industries because it's like, they do contain a lot of the constituents. And I want to see them succeed. And I think the only way to do that is by becoming more resilient and less dependent on government.
Yeah, that is something I think has changed. We have this idea that conservatives support businesses and we don't want to regulate businesses, but at the same time, we, nowadays it seems the standard thing to do is to also subsidize businesses with tax credits and carve outs and even direct subsidies like the launch grant. And that's supposed to be the pro business position. So, you know, it's one, it's taking tax dollars, but it's also, like you're saying, it's becoming too reliant on government for operation.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. It's like we need to change the direction of what we're going with those things. And I'm a firm believer in the 14th Amendment, where it's like I believe in equal application of law to everybody. And that includes industries too, where it's like, a lot of the small businesses, they're being crushed by a lot of these burdensome regulations. Well, the big businesses absolutely love them because they're benefiting from them. You see, small businesses don't receive any subsidies like the big corporations do. And, I believe in a fair market. And that means that there has to be competition. And it's, based off of meritocracy where it depends on your goods, your services, and everything that you provide. But we have these monopolies that I think the government really enables.
Yeah. So when you're talking to people in your district, whether business owners or regular folks with 9 to 5 jobs, whomever else you have there, what are you hearing from them? What are their priorities? What are they worried about? What do they want to see?
Well, they want to see their business succeed. And a lot of them are really concerned because under this Biden administration, the way the economy is going, people don't have the excess capital to spend. And that excess capital that people to normally have to spend is what makes a lot of these businesses thrive. And, it's a very hard subject to go into detail about and actually address simply because it's like, it plays into the bigger role of thing as to where the money is actually coming from with the Federal Reserve and printing as much money as they have. But, it's like everybody I've talked to, it's like all these businesses and the individuals, everybody is struggling under this administration. And there has to be a way that we can go and ease this burdensome taxation and overregulation that we have on a lot of our citizens.
So when it comes to voting on issues, the other day I was at a candidate forum and they asked that question, how do you decide how to vote on issues? And almost every one of them repeated some variation of what they called the three C's. Is it constitutional according to our federal and state constitutions? How does it affect my constituents? And how does it weigh on my conscience? Uh, that's kind of an easy answer because everyone will say that. Every
Mm-hmm.
Republican will say that. Even the Democrats will say that that's their heuristic. That's how they evaluate issues. So, you know, walk us through. You're given a bill. You got to decide how to vote on it, and maybe it's not an obvious issue like a gun control thing or an abortion bill. Maybe it's something that's a little more complicated. One thing that comes to mind is the fentanyl bill from earlier this year. Obviously, we need to
Mm-hmm.
do something about fentanyl trafficking, put those people away, keep it out of our state. But there were some concerns about the bill that were, does it give police and prosecutors too much leeway? Does it threaten to pull people who are, addicted rather than trafficking into this prosecution? Um, and so there was some discussion there, but in the end, obviously it passed and most people were on board because, well, we had to do something. So when it comes to really complex issues, how are you going to go about figuring out how to vote on those?
Well, I think that the way to go and look at it is to understand an issue. You need to understand all spectrums of that issue. And, I'd really go and listen to a lot of the debate that's happening on with those issues and weigh the pros and the cons of those issues. The other thing I'd be looking to is the citizens. I'd be wanting their input on these issues because it's like ultimately it's going to be impacting them. And I really want their feedback because I'm there to represent them. I'm not there to represent whatever this bill is or the associations or anything. It's more about the citizens and what the citizens really want and what the citizens need. And as far as like the three C's, it's like I'd be taking that into consideration as well because I am very constitutionally minded. I believe that, that's the foundation and what we need to base our decisions off of is the Constitution, and the citizens and even the conscience. Cause it's like, there's certain issues that I'm not going to agree with, but it's like I have to put aside my own wants and desires and look to what the citizens want.
Mhm. So when it comes to, every Republican in Idaho calls themselves a conservative. They say, I'm conservative,
Mm-hmm.
fiscally conservative, proven conservative. But obviously, there have to be very different definitions of that word because the way people vote, it's a very wide spectrum. It's funny, all the Democrats in Idaho, they're pretty united on most things. They vote together as a block almost always. They have pretty similar views on most issues, I'd say. Whereas in the Republican Party, it's a very, very wide spectrum. Whether you look at the Idaho Freedom Foundation's Freedom Index, whether you look at the American Conservative Union scores, or the Institute for Legislative Analysis, their platform ratings, there's a very wide gulf. So, how do you personally define what is conservative, and why does that definition fit you, but maybe not others, such as your opponent?
Well, as far as that goes, it's like I believe in traditional family values for one. I think that's a conservative principle. I don't think there's like a lot of people like to go and consider myself and other liberty-minded candidates to be extremists, if you will.
Mhm.
But it's like to me, it's like that's the conservative ideology is family, it's fiscal responsibility. It's looking at the way that our founding of this country actually was established and what our founding fathers left for us. So I mean, there's a lot to be said about being conservative, but I do have to admit that it's like I do have some of the libertarian leanings in some of my ideologies. But I think even then, it's like a lot of that is conservative based, just like the Constitutionalist Party. A lot of it is conservative based because it's all about preservation.
What sort of thing? What was it like working with Senator Zeiderfeld? What were some things that you drew inspiration from in the way that she handled herself in the legislature?
Well, I can tell you one of the biggest things that about Senator Zeiderveld, and that is it's like her faith. She has a devout faith to God, and you know that she places that above all else. Like a lot of the conversations we talked about, it's like she says when she's talking to people, she pictures that Jesus in the background, and she's speaking directly to him. And and I think that's a very, very laudable aspect and something phenomenal about Senator Zeiderveld. It's like you look what she's done with this legislative session, where first time in our Idaho history, it's like they're actually having church there at the Capitol. So I mean, it's like another aspect about her is that she's not one to go and bend the knee to the special interests of the corporations. She's always stayed steadfast in her resolve as far as representing the people. She isn't taking money from the special interest groups. It's not about that. It's about the citizens. Another thing that I find remarkable about Senator Zeiderveld is what she blew out of the water with the health and welfare,
Mm.
where, whistleblower came forward. We thought it was originally $10 million in misappropriated funds. And now you look at it, it's up to $71 million. It kind of makes me wonder. It's like, what about these other agencies that are within the government? What have they been obfuscating from? And, how have they been appropriating money? And the same patterns been consistent throughout a lot of these agencies.
So when you're in there and you're trying to kind of follow in those footsteps, uh, where do you see yourself being able to do the most good? Obviously, Senator Zeiderveld was on the Health and Welfare Committee, and so that gave her a unique opening to talk about the issues with the Department of Health and Welfare. Would you go on that committee, or maybe transportation and defense with your military background? Where do you see yourself fitting in?
Well, I mean, it's like I would do the transportation and defense because it's like I am rather upset about my opponent's voting record in regards to the Defend the Guard bill.
Hmm.
It's like to me, it's like I was a big proponent and a big supporter of that, and Dan McKnight has put his heart and soul into that bill. And being deployed like I have, I've seen the consequence, the effect of these deployments on our National Guard service members. People often don't understand that, they upend their whole lives to go and deploy in these foreign operations. I mean, imagine if you have a business established, you have all these contacts with your business, and all of a sudden, hey, I got to take off for 16 months to go and deploy. They move their business to somewhere else. Then you have to come back and pick up those pieces and have to reestablish your business. And it's not just hard on the business aspect of it, but it's also the family structure of it, where it's like you're leaving your kids and your wife or your husband and you're deploying. And that puts a lot of strain on the relationships, individual relationships. As far as other committees, it's kind of up in the air. It's like I wouldn't mind sitting on the education committee because I'm a big proponent of school choice. It's like one of the things I like to talk about is biodiversity. Biodiversity is a really unique subject because if you think about it, a rainforest, for instance. There's a lot of life and diverse amount of life. So you have like plants, you have animals, microorganisms, insects. They all work in this symbiotic relationship and they feed off of each other. But then you can have like a predator or a disease come along and it attacks one spectrum of it. So it can attack one specific plant. But because of that diverse life, that plant might die off, but it allows the rainforest to go and recover as a whole. And I think that this is something that's applicable to every aspect of life, whether it's economy, industries, education. And I think that, it's like as a conservative, we need to take back the word diversity because diversity is actually a really good thing. It's, you listen to a lot of these people talk about, their portfolios. What's one thing they hear all the time? Diversify, diversify, diversify. And we haven't done that. Instead, we have all these monocultures where it's like make it applicable to the agriculture industry, where it's like we have wheat, corn, potatoes. A disease comes along and attacks one of these commodities. What does it do to the rest of the economy? What does it do to everything? It wipes everything out and has just these devastating impacts with this cascading effect. And so it's like, as far as wherever I end up on whatever committee I end up on, this is one of the things that I believe is that we need to diversify everything.
Well, speaking of agriculture, one of the big debates this year was over illegal immigration, foreign workers, H1 or H2A, or whatever category of visa it was for the ag workers. And there seemed to be two sides, whereas some people were saying, we have to close the border, we have to hold the administration accountable, we have to, do something about the illegal immigrants who are living in our state right now, having, obviously broken the law and come into the country without permission. But then you had others, a lot of them from Eastern Idaho, saying that if you do that, you're going to destroy the economy because the economy relies on illegal immigration. There was a report that said 35,000 illegal workers are employed here. And the dairyman's lobbyist said in committee that he would guess that at least 70% would at least fail their audit when it comes to their paperwork. Not necessarily that they're here illegally, but it's possible. So how do you, as somebody who wants to represent you know a district out on the east side where that's you're surrounded by this, how do you solve this issue without completely upending the economy and making life worse for everyone who's here?
Well, I mean, there's not a single pill approach to this, and it's like it's an issue that's been going on for quite some time. I mean, decades, if you will, where a lot of people have become reliant on a lot of the illegal immigration that's been coming in as a labor force. And I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like, we're going to have to take action now. And I think part of that is to go out and actually uphold our immigration laws. But I think we need to start looking at other resources and other avenues to go and fill that void within the workforce. I think we should probably go and look at reevaluating what's happening with the Department of Corrections and maybe use some of those individuals with Department of Corrections and integrate them back into society. Because, it appears to me what's been happening is these people that are been going through the transition back into the civilian sector, that they've been putting them up in these halfway houses and keeping them localized inside these areas that are still riddled with drugs and other issues. And I think that if we could go and start implementing programs to spread them out, but also be able to keep accountability of them, then we can fill some of these voids that we have as far as the workforce goes. But another thing, and it's like I said, this isn't going to be one of those things that's just going to happen overnight. You can't just build a skyscraper overnight. It's something we have to work on and progressively move towards. And that would be a lot of it be entitlement reform, where it's like we start getting a lot of people off of these welfare programs and putting that money back inside the taxpayers' pockets, while also filling a lot of the workforce that these industries need. And I guess another aspect of that too is like, when I was growing up, a lot of us were out picking rock in fields and, doing a lot of the labor stuff. And maybe we need to start reevaluating how it's like we're raising our children in society and get them back into the workforce too for some of these low skill labor work jobs. So,
Yeah, I was about to say, Senator Zuiderveld actually introduced a bill this year to loosen the regulations on youth employment. It didn't go anywhere. It, didn't even pass its initial committee. It just sat in the drawer. But I feel like this is the year 2024. It's the 21st century. We're living in the future now, and it's an uncertain future. We don't know what the world's going to look like in the next 6 months, much less 10, 20, 30 years. And I think it's time to start having conversations about, maybe some out of the box ideas and, the things you said about, how to fill the labor gap if, we stop relying on illegal labor. I think that's those are some of the ideas we need to hear.
yeah, no, I mean, it's like I'm one of these people where it's like I get sick and tired of hearing people complain about issues. Me, it's like I want to hear solutions if somebody comes to me. I don't want to hear about the problems. It's like you can tell me what the problem is, but provide a solution for it. I think that's a more proactive approach to go and address a lot of these issues.
So outside of so you said served in the military, were deployed several times, and now you're running for office. What's in between? What have you worked other jobs? Had some businesses. What's your life outside of the political world been like?
Well, my life outside the political world has been kind of a tough one. It's been one of growth and development because it's like I did fall into this whole pit of the despair that a lot of veterans deal with. And, it's like it was a real struggle for me to go and dig myself out of it. It's like, I often consider myself to be a victim. And now it's like, put on the big boy pants and stop playing the victim, become a benefit to society, start becoming a part of society. I played the keyboard warrior forever, and I just got sick and tired of the way things were going. I'm like, I'm not making an impact. If anything, I'm turning people away. And so, it's like I need to get up and actually do something with myself. And so it's like I'm trying to be the change that I want to see.
Yeah, that's I watched the hearing on the Defend the Guard bill and hearing about, the experiences of veterans coming home from their deployments. And of course, at a high level, you look at, why were we there? Did we actually accomplish what we set out to accomplish? It really seems like the story of the 21st century so far is that we're trying to export democracy and freedom into other places while losing it at home. And that's I don't know. It's sometimes you wonder if it's by design, if there's some, power brokers at the highest levels who are pushing it, or if this is just creating an environment for people who have totalitarian visions to implement their agendas. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's always been kind of frustrating with the way that things have been with the military. Uh, I had a unique experience in my last deployment to Afghanistan in 2009. I was in the Zabul province, and I was working with a gentleman named Matthew Ho. He was a senior Department of State representative for that area, and Matthew resigned out of protest over Obama bringing in more troops to Afghanistan. And a lot of it's because it's like, the senior level officials did not understand the culture, didn't understand the society. Another aspect of that is like nobody could tell us what was the end goal, what was the end state, when did we know that mission was complete. And so, it's like it was these types of things that really started making me think about our involvement in these foreign affairs. And now it's like I look at what's happening in Israel, I look at what's happening in Ukraine, and my biggest thing is like I'm pro-life. And I think pro-life goes beyond just the spectrum of the child in the womb. I think pro-life also includes being against a lot of these foreign entanglements and these foreign wars that our founders warned us about. Even Dwight D. Eisenhower talking about beware of the military-industrial complex that comes to mind. But it's like I think that, as far as our foreign policy goes, peace is one of these things that's worthwhile to go and fight for.
Mhm. I think it's easy for the people, in the State Department, in the Defense Department, in the White House, even in the Congress, to forget that these are real people with real lives, and it's just like a giant game board where you're moving your pieces here and there and trying to beat your opponent. But that's
Yeah, and I mean, and it's frustrating because I mean, people don't understand. It's like, I was looking at how much money we spent on the war on terrorism, $6.5 trillion, and this includes like the nation building. This includes the wars themselves. This includes long-term care for veterans. How many lives have we lost in Iraq and Afghanistan? 44,000 lives in Iraq, 2,400 lives in Afghanistan. Of that, it's like 47 Idahoans have given their lives. You look at the toll on the civilians. It's like these are conservative figures I'm giving, but it's like they say that there was roughly 80,000 Afghans. There was roughly 300,000 Iraqis. I think the numbers are substantially more, but these wars we've been involved in, it's like it just kills me to go and know these numbers of the lives lost because it's like, me, to me, I'm like I said, I'm pro-life, and it's like I believe in the sanctity of life, and we should do everything we can to go and protect life. And yes, it's like I believe that in the non-aggression principle, where if we are attacked, then we should retaliate. But
mhm.
as far as like proactively being involved, it's like I think the Department of Defense has gotten it wrong. It shouldn't be the Department of Defense; it's become the Department of Offense.
Well, there's a historical irony in that since the founding of America until World War II, it was called the Department of War, and we had a pretty good record in wars. In the ones we fought, we won, and in between, we stood down and weren't didn't have eternal conflict. And then ever since then, we've had the Cold War, and then a brief break, and then the war on terror ever since. And the Department of Defense doesn't quite have the record that the Department of War did. But that's at the national level. And one thing that I've learned over the last few years is that there's not much we can do about the national level. We have our four congressional delegates, and they might listen to us, but usually not. But here at the state level is where we can really make a difference. So, what are some really important issues that you want to make a difference with in the legislature in the next 2 years?
Well, I think one of the big things is that I look at the education system. I think it's failed a lot of our kids. I mean, there are a lot of good people that are part of this system, but they've taken this, top-down approach, almost like a factory, looking for consistency rather than quality. And you see them continually lowering a lot of the standards as far as like academia goes. And I think that, the government schools, they need some competition because I think that competition drives innovation. and we just don't have it. So that'd be one thing that I'd really work on is to go and drive that competition to create more opportunity for parents to have an education for their children that's more congruent with their lives and their values and how they see society. There's a couple little pet things that I want to do. Um, One of them is it's like I'd like to change things as far as like tobacco products. I should say smoking cessation stuff. And I think that we should go and use some of our money from Project Filter, reappropriate it to go and use it towards like buying up real estate or renting real estate at convenience stores and sell those smoking cessation products there.
Hmm.
That way, it's like people, if they're creatures of habit, they go into or into a gas station in the morning, get their morning coffee, and they have that option there. Because right now, if there's somebody wants to get these products, they're going to a pharmacy to get them. So it's about making these types of things more accessible. So that's one of my personal things, but
Going back to the education, we'll maybe come back to tobacco in a moment. Uh,
mhm.
Over the last couple of years, there's been different efforts to reform the school system to set it up so that money follows the child. Vouchers, ESAs. This year they tried a tax credit that didn't even get out of committee. What kind of system do you think would work the best for that, if any? And how would you get it through the legislature?
Well, as far as like what I think is that I really like the tax credit idea because a lot of the parents I've talked to, they believe that, if they do the voucher system or one of these other systems, that it's going to come with strings attached from the government. I don't think that's the case. I think that we can go and make a means for parents to actually go and get their kids the education they want their kids to have. Um, you look at the metrics behind it, and it's like on the SATs, public school or government school kids typically score about 1,000 points, where it's like private school kids or even homeschool kids are scoring at 1,200 points. So it's like there's a substantial difference there. As far as getting it through the committees, it's like, I'm going to have to build some sort of alliance with a lot of people. And it's like I plan on working with a lot of people to try pushing it through and getting it through. Because it's going to take an army of us to go and get it through because the lobby for the educational institutions is so massive and consumes so much. And it's like a lot of people take their marching orders from Governor Little. It's like, a lot of the stuff I've read about, the education system itself is like, well, this is Governor Little's approach. That's Governor Little's approach. And I'm like, but there's a separation of powers. It's
Mhm.
like Governor Little, his purpose to go and execute the law, to go and execute the intent of the legislation. It's not our responsibility to do what he wants to do. And so I think, a lot of that's changing that metric around too. And it's like if the Education Association or any of these other institutions want to work on legislation, I'll be happy to open up the dialogue for it. But as far as like, who I work for, it's for the citizens, it's not for the governor.
Yeah. It seems like each year the governor comes out with one specific piece of legislation that he puts all his energies behind. Last year it was the launch grant, and then this year it's the Idaho Works with the school facilities fund. I imagine if he came out in support of some school choice proposal that it would get some traction, but he has not done that yet.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as far as those programs go, it's like I wouldn't have voted for the House Bill 24, the Idaho Launch Grant Program,
Mhm.
because I think it's a disservice. I think it falls in line with what Joe Biden's been doing. It's like you go and you look how he's like paying off all these student loans, and it's well, this really isn't different. The only difference is he's paying them off before the kids actually go and have that student loan. And and it's frustrating to me too because it's like with my military service, I worked for my post 9/11 GI Bill. It's like I bled and sweat for that, and it's a disservice just to go and give this money away as though that there's no sort of sacrifice that has to be paid for it when it comes from the citizens and their tax dollars. So yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the big businesses who pushed the launch grant, they made a political calculation or a financial calculation actually that it would be cheaper to invest some money in some PACs and lobbies and donate to some politicians and then get this $80 million back from the taxpayer than it would be to just train their own workers. And that's a frustrating aspect of modern government for me that you know that's just a normal thing to do now.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel the same way about it. It's like I think that, these industries, it's like they shouldn't be relying on the government for all this stuff. If they really need the workforce, then it's like, they need to put in the effort and they need to invest in money. They can provide these scholarships, they can provide these grants, but they choose not to because it's more cost effective for them to go through the government to do it than to do it themselves.
So let's see. What are some other issues that are important to you? What about the post-COVID world? We saw how government at all levels locked down, shut down businesses, shut down churches, and there's a very vocal group on the conservative side that wants to see some consequences for that. Never again. Hold some people accountable. But then there's others, I think, who just want to move on, pretend it never happened. How do you balance those, but at the same time put structures in place to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like I was a big proponent for the Great Barrington Declaration, where it's like it had a targeted approach to go and look after the most vulnerable. Meanwhile, it's like everybody else should have gone through the process of getting infected and natural immunity. I know it's kind of a harsh reality as far as COVID goes, but I think it would have allowed everything to remain open. We should have continued on because it's like how many businesses were shuttered and never opened again. It's like people were desperate during that period of time and the churches were closed. That's one of those times where it's like people really need God in their life. And that didn't exist. It's like I think it was a gross overreach. And it's like I kept on hitting at my local lawmakers and asked them when was the legislature going to reconvene? When are you going to tell the governor to reconvene the legislature to address this issue? Because instead we ended up leaving it up to these bureaucrats to determine things. And I think that's wrong. And I think it needs to be stopped. I don't think that what we experienced in 2020 should ever happen again. And it's like I'll work with other lawmakers to ensure that that never happens again.
Yeah. Even so, a bill to ban government agencies from imposing mask mandates could not get out of the Senate State Affairs, it got drawered. And a bill to restrict the authority of health districts to simply say that instead of doing all things, they only get to do things that are necessary and reasonable. That died in committee as well. So
Mhm.
it seems like, almost an impossible task to even get the smallest restrictions on these bureaucracies in place. You mentioned the Project Filter earlier. That's one small component of the Department of Health and Welfare, which they've got their fingers everywhere with distributing
Mhm.
federal money to early childhood programs, and that's what got them in trouble. And the whistleblower came out to Senator Zeiderveld. They've got, they were involved with Planned Parenthood putting sex ed curricula in public schools. Yeah, if you ever come down to Boise, you see the buses with the, you know, big ads that say that you can cure STDs or, get Noxalone for drug overdoses. It's really like they're, yeah. I if you just ask me in a vacuum, should a government have a health department? I would say probably not, and if so, it should be very small. But it's actually the biggest and most powerful and most expensive department in the entire state. Um, what can we do about that?
Well, I think a lot of that starts with the grassroots level of looking at issues, and because it's like I talked to a couple of physicians, and a lot of them they're scared of these departments because they feel like they can't go and practice medicine how they were taught to practice medicine. And so I think we need to go and actually do a really, really big restructuring and reform of a lot of this because I believe in the free market. And I think that the free market could go and determine a lot of these things. But government has stuck its fingers in it since Obamacare. And you see the premiums for everything rising up astronomically for everybody. And I think a lot of it is just getting in there and gutting a lot of these programs that I think are kind of erroneous. It's like it shouldn't be the government's responsibility to take care of your health. That's up to you. It's like my mother used to tell me the best helping hand you'll ever have is at the end of your own arm.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, government programs breed more dependence on government. You had,
Hmm.
a bill that would have put some barriers on Medicaid expansion, put some thresholds that it has to meet, and people came out to testify against it, saying, "Don't pass this bill. I'm going to die," because they've just become reliant on it. And then, you support new
Hmm.
government programs, and thankfully they stripped out the summer EBT program because that was just going to create more dependence. So, I don't know, one person I've talked to, a former legislator that I've worked with, says that we need off ramps from these programs. Do you see a way to do that where you can get buy in from the legislature to create ways to get people off the programs gradually, maybe.
Well, I mean, I imagine it's like any drug addict where it's like they have this dependency, and it's like if you go and you take them off cold turkey, it's like it's going to be quite the struggle. So it's like I would be very open to going and working with other lawmakers to actually go and decrease the dependency on these programs. And, because it's like like I said, I firmly believe in the free markets. And I think that by going and getting rid of some of these dependencies, we can actually free up that money and give that money back to the citizens because they know how to invest money better than what the government ever could. And I also think that, by getting rid of some of these dependencies too, that it'll actually drive the prices down for a lot of the medical care that people receive.
Hmm.
I
No,
mean, you
that's
look at the veterinarian system and the way the vets work, and it's like, you can have surgeries that are substantially cheaper than what you'd have with going through, a hospital with the insurance. And so,
yeah. I've seen a lot of different options popping up, whether it's faith-based organizations that are you buy in and you're part of a cooperative, or
mhm,
kind of like the gym model, the where you just pay a monthly fee and they'll take care of whatever you need, whether it's nothing or whether it's you go there 3 times in a month. uh so yeah, getting the government out. I mean, it's basic economics that once you get a third party involved in paying your bills, that's going to distort the market. People don't know how much things cost, so they can't compete on price, and there's no incentive to keep costs down because the third party is paying most of it. It's a mess, but it seems a very hard mess to untangle.
yeah, sorry, my cat decided to jump in and say hello. Yeah, it's like you're absolutely right with that, where it's like, it comes back to that whole notion of like, competition drives innovation, but it also drives prices in this sort of realm. And so it's like I think that there's a lot we could do to go and actually drive down a lot of prices. And I think that's getting rid of the government dependency. It's like people look at things and it's like, what's the easiest thing for me to do when we should be going and looking at it's like, well, sometimes it's like we got to make sacrifices and do the hard thing for that reward.
So I'm looking at your sunshine pages, you and your opponent.
Hmm.
He's raised a little bit more than you, so at least as of the last reporting. But you have about twice as much money coming in from individuals. He's made
Hmm.
up he's made up the ground with companies. So do you feel like you've got grassroots behind you on this?
I think I do. I mean, it's like I think a lot of people are putting their hard-earned money into my campaign, and they have a lot of faith in my abilities and what I'm going to do. And it speaks volumes about like the character of the community and where the community's allegiance really is. It's like, I think that my opponent has become too dependent on these corporations and these industries to go and, well, should put it this way, where it's like these industries do not have the ability to vote. The citizens do. And, this shows volumes as to where the citizens are really standing as far as this race goes, where they're supporting me over him. Even it's like with his donations, you look at it and it's a lot of the same people and a lot of the same politicians that are giving money back and forth to each other.
So I was out at Twin Falls for the Republican convention 2 years ago. Uh,
Hmm.
Other than that, I've driven through time to time, but it's a lovely place. Obviously, you got that cool bridge in the canyon. Um, it's also interesting that your district is, basically the city, and you're surrounded by these massive rural districts on all sides. Uh, what's the dynamic there? What's it like? What's the feeling of people? Are there a lot of conservative voters in there, even though it's a city, and that's sometimes hard to find them?
Well, I believe that there's a lot of conservative voters here inside the city of Twin Falls. It's like a lot of us have been born and raised here, but then it's like we do have a lot of transplants that are coming in from like Oregon, California, Washington. And it's sad to say, but it's like the generational Idahoans that have lived here are the ones that are pushing a lot of these progressive and liberal ideas. Where it's like you have these people that are coming in from Washington and California, and they're saying it's like, hey, we experienced this 20 years ago. What are you guys doing here? It's like, we moved here to get away from this, and now we're seeing it here. So it's like they've become some of the most staunch defenders of freedom and liberty and the American way of life. Because this that Idaho's like the last bastion of hope for a lot of these
Mhm.
people.
Yeah, I can say that for myself. I moved here with my family 6 years ago from Washington. I miss the trees and the rain and the mountains, but at the same time, the political I saw where the political situation was going, and that was, a year and a half before COVID. So
Mhm.
I luckily got out early. And as much as we complain about them shutting down businesses and churches here, it was 10 times worse in those other states. So people are, coming here for, something that they remember. We remember what America was like when it was really free, and we still see that
Hmm.
here, but we also see the same things that are starting to happen, the same good intentions that, started those other states down the road toward being, blue totalitarian socialist communities. And we're trying to keep Idaho what it is and what attracted us here. And I'm sure that's what, most people feel inside, but if you've been here a long time, it's easy to just become complacent and think, no, don't, you're just bringing problems in from somewhere else. Everything's okay here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you look at one of the guys that's running in 24, Clint Hostetler. It's like he's a transplant from California, and it's like he talks about all of these issues, and he's like, this is exactly what I saw. He's like, I moved here for a better life for my family, and it's like I see the same thing happening here. And it's like I grew up here. It's I'm not sure which generation I am, but it's like I'm either a third or fourth generation Idahoan. So I've been here all my life, and it's like my family's broke ground in eastern Idaho, big potato farmers. And it's like with my dad's job, it brought him out here, and so it's like I was born and raised in this area in the Magic Valley, and it's what I've known all my life. And I've just seen it progressively change over the years. And it's like at first the growth and everything was great, but all of a sudden it's like the growth exploded, and now it's like we have all these people pushing all this stuff on us and really tarnishing our history and our heritage. Like the canyon growing up, used to go down to the Durkee's Lake and the Hidden Lakes and go swimming down there, and there weren't hardly any houses. And now it's like the canyon, it's like it has houses sprung up everywhere
Mm.
across that canyon because people want, these pristine views, and real estate was cheap. And I really think it's done kind of a disservice where it's like we haven't been able to conserve a lot of like the home field that I had growing up. It's like driving down the street. You don't have the same feel where we used to leave our doors unlocked and be running in and out of each other's houses, as kids. Now it's like you don't have that anymore. I don't see kids riding bikes nearly as often as what I did because, it's like my bicycle, the tires were worn bare on that thing. But it's things have changed. And, it's like I think a lot of people don't even know who their neighbors are. I don't know who all my neighbors are. And it's like, I'm guilty of this, but I think, we need to get back to what is the Idaho way, and that is to get to know our neighbors, to love one another, to take care of each other. We can't change things at the federal level, but we can change things right in our backyard and in our community.
Well, that sounds like a great note to cap things off. Is there any final thoughts, or where can we go to see you and support you?
Well, you can go to my website. It is Leavitt, the number four, Idaho.com, or you can follow me on Twitter. It is Dave_Leavitt_Idaho, or you can follow me on Facebook at David.J.Leavitt. Um, as for closing thoughts,
And you can find all those links at the Gem State Chronicle on the primary polls.
I appreciate that. As far as final thoughts, it's like, we're in the midst of a battle here. Like it's a battle for our nation, for the heart of our nation, the soul of our nation. It's, about the morals that we grew up believing and living by. And, it's like I think that we need to have strong men, strong statesmen. We need warriors to go and be leading this battle because it is a battle. And, I plan on bringing that to the table, and I plan on being that fighter for everybody.
David Leavitt, running for House of Representatives, District 25, Seat B. Thank you.